Okay, so let's start off here by implementing some of the create endpoints, and there's going to be two of those. One will be the endpoint for creating a new friend, and the other one will be an endpoint for adding new favorites. So let's open up our server file in our backend and add those endpoints. Okay, now we're going to add those down here. Okay, so we'll just kind of group our endpoints here by the CRUD operation that they're supporting. So these ones will be read, and down here we'll have create. And the first endpoint we're going to make is going to be for creating new friends. So that's going to be a post endpoint, as I mentioned earlier. And the URL for this is going to be /friends. So that's just kind of a RESTful convention. Whenever you want to create a resource, you send a post request to a URL that is that resource in plural. Okay, so the idea here is that we're going to be getting all of the information needed for a new friend from the client side. So essentially the client side is going to collect all that information in the new friend page. Okay, so it's going to have a form like that where it collects all the information. It's then going to send that information in a post request to our endpoint here, where we'll basically dissect that information and insert it into our database. Now we're still using a fake database, which is just a JSON array at this point. So we're just going to basically be pushing that data onto that array for the time being, but we will add a database later on. All right, so what the callback for this endpoint is going to look like, we're going to have the request and response as usual. We're going to start off by getting the information that was sent along with the request. So essentially, we're just going to assume that all of that information is in the request body directly. So what we'll say is just something like new friend info equals request.body. All right, and do make sure before using request.body that you have this app.useexpress.json thing up at the top, because otherwise request.body will always be undefined. All right, so now that we have our new friend info, all we're going to do is push that onto our friends array up here. And to do that, we just have to say friends.push new friend info. All right, and then we're going to send back our updated friends to the client side by saying response.json friends. Now, one other thing that we do actually need to do in this endpoint is generate a random ID based on this new friend info. Generally, doing things like generating random IDs is not something we want to leave up to the client side, just because if someone knows what they're doing and they realize we're doing that on the client side, there are some unpleasant things they might be able to do just by sending a request with an ID that conflicts with other users, that sort of thing. So to generate the new ID, what we're going to do is we're going to install the UUID package into our project here. And we're going to use that up here by saying import v4 as UUID from UUID. We're going to generate a new ID for this new friend by saying const new friend equals ID. We'll generate that ID here by calling UUID. And we're going to get all of the existing properties from our new friend info by saying ... new friend info. All right, and then we're just going to say friends.push new friend instead and send back our friends after we've done that. And you could send back just the new friend if you wanted to. There's not really a reason that we're sending back all of our friends, except that that just makes it easier for the client side in certain situations. Cool, so that's our endpoint for creating a new friend. The next one that we're going to implement is the endpoint for creating a new favorite. So this one is going to be app.post/favorites. And the callback is going to be request response. And what we're going to do here is get that favorite ID from the request body. And to do that, we're going to say const. We're going to assume that it's on a property called ID or favorite ID or something in the request body. So we'll have to say const, or friend ID rather. We'll say friend ID equals request.body.friend ID. If you want to use object destructuring to make it a little more compact, you can do it like that. And we are going to have to keep this structure in mind when we're implementing the front end side of this as well, right? We'll just need to make sure that our request body on our post request has this kind of structure. So now that we have the friend ID, all we're going to do is say favorites.push, and we're going to push that friend ID onto that array. Okay, and then last but not least, we're going to send back our updated favorites to the client by saying response.json favorites. And those are our two endpoints there. So let's run our server now by saying npm run dev. We should see server is listening on port 8080. And if you want to test these endpoints before we actually implement the corresponding functionality on the front end, there are a few ways you can do that. The main way that I would recommend is by using a program called Postman. Okay, and Postman, all it is just a very fancy user interface that allows us to custom craft our own requests that we can then use to test our server. And if you don't already have Postman, all you have to do is Google download Postman app, and you should find it. Just look for this logo there on that. So once you've gotten this downloaded, you should see a screen that looks something like this. I'm going to click on this plus button up here to create a new request. And what you can see is that this lets you select the exact request type and URL that you want to send to your endpoints. This is something that you can't do from the browser directly, right? We were able to test our GET endpoints from the browser because that's what browsers send by default. But when you get into other types of requests, it's easier to use a tool like Postman. Okay, so let's select post because we're testing two different post endpoints. And let's first test our new friend info endpoint here. So we're going to send a post request to http://localhost 8080/friends. And we're going to add a request body to this. And the way we do that is by clicking on this body tab here, going to raw from the radio buttons, and from this drop down selecting JSON. So this will basically let us specify the request body that we're sending in JSON. Okay, so what this is going to look like, we're going to have the person's name that we're creating. Okay, so I'll just say something like John Doe. They're going to have an age, which I'll say something like, I don't know, 34. And for now, we'll just specify interests as well. We don't have to go through and specify everything here at the moment. So we'll just say interests, painting, skateboarding, and sailing. Okay? Just for test, John Doe is going to be gone as soon as our server restarts anyway, so you don't have to worry too much about this. Okay, so the way that we can test our server now is by clicking on Send. And what we should see, we're going to see the response that the server sends back down here. Okay, we should see that it sent back all of our updated people and that we see our old friends. And in addition, we see John Doe with this randomly generated ID that we created using the UUID package. Cool, so everything looks good with that endpoint. Let's test out our new favorite endpoint now. The way we're going to do that is by changing this to /favorites, and we're going to change the request body here to include friend ID. Okay, and we can set that to whatever we want. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. Oh, and we do need to add quotation marks around this since this is actual JSON and not just a JavaScript object. And yep, okay, that matches. Just wanted to make sure of that. So let's click send now. And we should see that that worked as well, right? And that sent us back an updated array of the favorites on our server. And that about does it for our two create endpoints. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.